I know, very rude indeed. But desperate times and all that. And it is desperate times because we're in Revelation and things are getting wild and wacky. I think I'm actually waiting for the thumbs up still. Oh, no, I'm not waiting for the thumbs up. Hope I didn't say anything embarrassing. That was the laugh of a guy, of somebody who knows Pastor says something embarrassing every week. Hi, friends. Good morning, class. Good morning. Welcome back to our study of Revelation. We have made it. Oh, would you advance the slide, please? I think people at home, they might prefer to see that instead of me, but they're going to get me, whether they like it or not. If the folks here have to suffer with my face, the folks at home do too. That's part of the cost of admission. We are studying the book of Revelation, and boy, there's a lot going on. I think the world is falling apart for the second time now. We'll get there. Let's talk big picture stuff, and then we'll get caught up to where we are currently. So, in the big picture, this is the revelation of what? Chapter 1, verse 1-ish probably tells you the right answer. The revelation of, say it again? Jesus Christ, that's right. Who was the revelation given to firstly? John the Baptist? No? John the Elder, that's right. We would usually think of him as John the Evangelist or John the Apostle. He is also known as John the Elder because of all of the original 12 apostles. He was the oldest. Why? No, he was not born first. He was probably one of the younger ones. No, he's the oldest because he died last. That's correct. The rest of the apostles were killed for their faith. And John had the notable exception that he was not. He had a couple other distinctions. He was called John the Theologian by some of the early church fathers, patriarchs, writers. And that is, when we think about theologians, well, I don't know how much y'all think about theologians per se. I think about them a fair amount. And if you didn't know this yet, you are one, right? Anybody who talks about God, theo, logos, or anybody who studies about God, which is what we're doing here, you're theologians too. But when we think about theologians, in our modern world, I think we tend to think of them as philosophers or logicians, like people who try to work things out by reason and make assertions about God by reason. And in our modern world, that is kind of how it works. But if you read through your New Testament, I think you will find that Paul much better fits the archetype of the modern theologian than John does. But that's because we have a very specific post-Enlightenment view of what theology is. You know, one of the reasons that Lutheranism has the best theology in town, I say that because I am one. And if I didn't think that, I'd be something else, okay? But one of the things that makes us really good at theology is we are able to accept that not everything about God is rational to the human mind. Oftentimes, points of departure. So like if you are to compare the theology of a Lutheran versus a Southern Baptist, for instance, some of the assertions of Southern Baptist theology will be more rational to the human mind than the Lutheran counterpoint. But we're not persuaded by that because we would say, yes, you have worked something out, but it becomes inconsistent with other parts of the Word of God. And so what we believe is that you have adjusted your reading of those other things to fit your rationale. A good example of that would be our take on the Lord's Supper, right? Most Protestantism says that it represents Jesus. It's not literally physically him. Maybe he's literally present in a spiritual way, but you're not actually eating Jesus' body. To which we would answer with the ancient church, yeah, actually we are. When he says, "This is my body," we believe that. Another would be the emphasis on the doctrine of double predestination, the idea that God predestines some to salvation and some to damnation, is much more rational than our doctrine of predestination, which is, oh no, yeah, he certainly has foreordained who will be saved. But we don't make the follow-on statement, ergo, he also foreordained who would be damned. We don't make that move. It's a logical move, but we think it violates what God has revealed about himself and his character and how God speaks about salvation. So, John, he isn't as linear and rational as us Westerners would like him to be, probably. But he is very theological. He sees things in a way that is perhaps more, let's say, spiritually in tune. He tells stories in his gospel that the other three gospel writers don't tell. And there's it just feels different. Y'all know the Christmas story, right? In Luke, you get the Christmas story, right? You get Elizabeth and Zechariah, you get Mary and Joseph. Matthew, we get some of that, and we get the Magi, right? Mark skips it entirely. He just drops you in with full-grown Jesus. But you know what the story of Christmas is in the Gospel of John? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. The Word was God, he was with God in the beginning. Skipping down a few verses, and the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. Now, what's interesting about that? John also had one more special distinction, and it happened on Good Friday. Jesus is hanging on the cross. He looks down at John, and who's standing next to him? Mary. And he says to Mary, "Behold your son," and to John, "Behold your mother." If there was anybody equipped to tell the story of Bethlehem and the star and the angelic visitation and all of that stuff, probably the guy who took Mary into his house so that she could live with him and be cared for by him. He probably had details on that story that nobody else. But see, that's not the way he saw the events. Do you understand what I'm saying? So anyways, John the theologian. And so it is probably no surprise that it is to John that God gives this revelation. Maybe this revelation shaped the way John told the rest of the story, because it could have come first. We're not entirely sure. All right, so the book of Revelation, genre-wise, it's what? We do this every week. Prophetic vision and letters. There are letters embedded within the prophetic vision, right? Those letters have specific addressees to the church of, to the church of, to the church of. But at the conclusion of each of those letters, it says, "He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches." Right? So even though those letters address the specific real-life, real-time situations of those churches, the message is not for that time and place alone. Anybody with ears to hear, and I would add to that, and hearts to believe, gets something out of those letters. John is taken up to heaven and begins to see things from the heavenly perspective. Now, a couple things to be aware of. Being prophetic vision, what is the number one literary feature of prophetic vision? What do you expect to see a lot of? in prophetic vision? Symbolism, right? Almost everything is symbolic. The way things look, the color of things maybe, numbers. They're all symbolic, and you should handle them that way firstly. That's their primary way. Last week we spent a little bit about communication theory, about encoding and decoding messages, right? And hopefully the time spent on that kind of helps you get some insight into perhaps at least part of the reason why it is the way it is. I've heard other things too, like, it is encoded so that the Romans didn't know what they were talking about or whatever. And, maybe there is some truth to that. But I think in the first place, primarily, the message is delivered in the way that it is because it contains more than John could handle. It contains more than John could understand. What God did was he delivered up something greater than John so that John could deliver it to us, and through the Holy Spirit, things would be unpacked over the millennia, right? And maybe for us in this time and place, different aspects of it are unpacked for us than a previous generation, or maybe people in a different part of the world. We saw how that worked. This is what's beautiful about the scriptures. We saw how that worked, chapter 1, the initial vision, chapter 2 and 3, in the epistles, as different parts of the vision were for different churches. Right? Remember that? Same thing is true for us. All right, so he's up in heaven, and firstly, we just see how things are going in heaven. We've got 24 elders, and just as a primer, as a reminder, when we hit the number 12, what should we think usually right away? 12. Yeah, the people of God, right? The people of God. 12 tribes of Israel, 12 apostles. 12 and 12, that seems conspicuous to me. Maybe we're talking Old and New Testament churches, right? 24 is a small number. These people are called elders. They certainly have a direct relationship with Jesus. My suggestion to you would be to think of the 12 elders as a picture of all of God's people with a particular focus on the personal relationship between God and that believer. Coming forward a bit, we're gonna look at two other manifestations of this. We get a picture of the 144,000 dressed in white. On their forehead, they are sealed, right? Remind me what a seal does. What is the function of a seal? Two things at least. Security, right? It protects the contents. If you seal a scroll, then the insides can't be messed with unless somebody breaks the seal, right? So it makes it tamper resistant, right? And number two, what else does a seal do? Especially if it's got a signet. It authenticates it, right? It says this is from whomever it is, usually somebody significant. So these saints around the throne, dressed in white, are sealed on their forehead, which I would suggest to you is a picture of not necessarily physical security, right? Why on the forehead? What does this invoke in your mind right now? Yeah, it guards their mind, right? We know in a deep down scientific way things that were not necessarily known in the ancient world, which is this is both the seat of cognition, like logic, and also feelings, and also physical sensation. I mean, really, when you get down to it, right? There are precious few things. Maybe I think the gut is the only area in which your experience of it doesn't happen firstly in the brain, right? So it guards your heart and mind, right? All the feelings you have, they're manifest here. Or they occur here. They might manifest elsewhere in your body, which is why we'll talk about being heart sick, right? Or we'll talk about a bad feeling in your gut. Well, that feeling manifested down here. You sensed it down here, but it started up here, right? So they're sealed on their forehead. 144,000, that's a conspicuous number. 144 is the square of what? What's the square root? Oh boy. What's the square root of 144? 12. Good job, everybody. Yeah. Again, and when we hit the number 12, that's a picture of God's people. So you get 12 times 12. Could be Old Testament, could be New Testament. Maybe there are other ways of understanding this, but I think that's pretty solid. So you get 144 times 1,000. Well, what's the cube root of 1,000? Some of y'all are like, I don't know what a cube root is. It's 10, right? 10 times 10 times 10. 10 to the third power is 1,000. 10, what's 10 a symbol of? Do you remember? Completion, right? Wholeness. So you get 10 times 10 times 10, the absolute complete total number of all of God's people, Old and New Testament. That's 144,000. All of God's people sealed, dressed in robes that are washed white in the blood of the Lamb. But 144,000 is still a knowable number. I would suggest to you that this is sort of a picture of God's people as a vast crowd, but still you can kind of see how you all fit into the body. In fact, it lists them as being members of different tribes, right? So you can kind of see they all have their place in the body. And then right after that, there's another vision, and this time it's a countless multitude of every nation, tribe, and race, right? And tongue. Well, who are they? They're also God's people, right? But this time, I would say it's with an emphasis on the vastness and the inclusivity of what God's people looks like. It would be easy if I was a Jewish believer to read that accounting of the 144,000 and assume that God was talking only about Jews because, well, he just listed them as being members of these different tribes, but actually way too small a number to include all of the Israelites who had lived. So we get these three different pictures going from God's people personally, face to face, to everybody with their place in the body, to the vastness of the church that most of us will never actually recognize. And that's particularly true if you go to like let's say a church with about 60 people on a Sunday. You might not feel like you're in a vast multitude of believers. But it's a reality that God wants for you. There's a scroll. And by opening the scroll, things are unveiling in history. I've been over these things enough. I'm not going to spend any time on that because I want to get into some new content. And if we can do it before the 30-minute mark, that would be fantastic. So, but each time they open a seal, a new calamity arises. And I would suggest to you that the first four seals are born of man's desire to take the authority that rightly belongs to God, and then all of the fallout that comes after that. The fifth seal, I do want to spend a moment on this, is the saints under the altar crying out, "How long, O Lord, until you avenge us?" Which I think could be well understood to be them saying, "Lord, how long will you let sin run rampant in the world?" Two things you should know about this. Number one, it reminds us that those saints that we celebrate on All Saints' Day, those who have gone on to glory ahead of us, their story isn't done yet. They have crossed the finish line as far as this mortal life is concerned, but the best is yet to come because there is yet to be a resurrection that they'll take part in. And we can save that bit for later on in Revelation, but just to remind you, the Christian doctrine is not eternal life as a ghost. That is an oversimplistic and incomplete picture of what eternal life is. You will spend eternity with Christ, body and soul, having sensations, eating food, doing things, not just floating around and, woo. But the other bit is the answer to how long, God actually answers. He says, a little while longer until the full number has been added to your ranks, right? So it is the mercy of God and his heart for those who have not yet been saved that withholds his judgment in the end. It reminds me a bit of the story of the wheat and the tares that Jesus tells us. Do y'all remember this parable? there's a field of grain, but one night an enemy comes in and he sows weeds in the field. And when the workers find out, they say, Lord, do you want us to go pull up the weeds? And he says, no, leave them till the harvest, because you might accidentally pull up some of the good wheat with it. So it is the mercy of God and his forbearance that knows not until the full number is complete. And when is that? Only he knows. But I should tell you this. You were one of the names and one of the faces that he had in mind when he said that. You were. Sixth seal, the world starts shaking apart. Seventh seal, we then bring out these trumpets. And this is where we were last week. There are seven angels with 7 trumpets. Well, 7 angels, each with 1 trumpet. Just to be clear, there's not 49 trumpets. The golden censer. Almost forgot the golden censer. So when the 7th is blown, the censer is poured out on the earth. The censer with the incense is a picture of what? Do you remember? What the incense represented for the God's people? The prayers of God's people, right, rising up. And then that is poured out and emptied onto the earth. And then we got into the 7 trumpets, right? So there's 7 angels with 7 trumpets. Each blows a trumpet and something happens. It's very parallel to the 7 seals. Now, this would be a good moment to just talk about the structure of the book, because it doesn't work the way we would like it to work as 20th century. I would say that 20th century Westerners would have a harder time. It actually is such that people today are less linear and logical, I believe, than they used to be. And that has something to do with the postmodern movement, which has its virtues and it has a lot of problems too. I'm not going to get into all that, but the way that traditionally modern people like to read things is in the words of the Mad Hatter, start at the beginning, and when you get to the end, stop. Well, I think if you try to read the book that way, you're going to read it wrongly. Because I don't think things are told in a straight-through chronological fashion. It would be best probably to understand that this book is more like a spiral. We're going to see world-ending cataclysms like 3 times. Get comfortable with that. Y'all have read Genesis, right? I trust y'all have read Genesis. What happens in Genesis chapter 1? Creation. What happens in Genesis chapter 2? Creation. We have 2 creation stories in the first 2 chapters of Genesis. Did God create the world twice? No. The first time it's told with a perspective of all of the universe, told with almost equal emphasis. The second telling tells the story of creation, but this time with a particular focus on humanity. Same story told twice in a row, back to back. If you read Revelation with that in mind, you'll do a lot better. What you're going to get is some of the same events happening repeatedly, but with a different focus each time. Have you ever tried to tell somebody what happened in a book you were reading, and you're telling them about the main plot, but then, some characters in the main plot were involved in some subplots, and then you have to go back and retrace your steps and be like, well, so earlier in the book, this happened, right? And you maybe have to do that a couple times. Maybe you're better at summarizing than I am. Given my normal schedule for Bible study, you probably are. Same thing, right? Same thing. It's a lot of story to be told, and it's helpful to shift your focus sometimes to get a more complete view of the story. Does this make sense to you? Okay. So we're at the 7 trumpets. We have 7 angels. The first angel sounded his trumpet, and hail mixed with fire and hail and blood, right? And we talked about sort of how that's a strange thing, right? You have both destructive ice and destructive fire at the same time. These sort of seemingly opposed things, but they're both doing their work. And the other thing that I would note to you is notable about hail and fire specifically is they're both excellent at destroying structures and damaging creatures. Because of that, a third of the world gets, a third of the trees, all the grass gets burned up, and a third of the living creatures, right? A third of the ship. No, that's the second one. Sorry, this is much shorter than I'm used to. Yes, thank you. So a third of the earth is burned up, and a third of the trees are burned up, and the grass is burned up, right? So the world is getting inhospitable. But a third, that's a weird number, right? And I suggested to you that this is a large fraction, but less than half, which means that you could maybe consider this to be a sustainable amount of destruction while life goes on. Maybe this is a picture of the ongoing tragedy and suffering that is just ever present in history. But let's keep going. Second angel sounded a trumpet. A huge mountain, all ablaze, crashes into the ocean. And it kills sea life, a third of the sea life. It kills the ship. It destroys a third of the ships, ruins the water. Is it a volcano? Maybe. Is it a meteor? Maybe. Does it matter? No. Right? The idea here is the vast ocean, which is more than symbolically a picture of the fecundity of life, right? The great, look, we have no idea how many sea creatures there are. What we know for sure is we haven't seen them all. There's even things we thought were extinct that's still alive down there, right? And every once in a while, something washes up on the shore, and we're like, aliens, right? Because it's so weird. And in the story of creation, it talks about the waters teeming with life, that we had nothing to do with. We have cultivated almost no sea life. I know there's a little bit of like fish farms and stuff, but like that's a new thing. And you could make an argument that, livestock and agriculture, we did that. The ocean is just life that we had nothing to do with. And right now, our biggest thing is just trying to make sure we don't overfish it, right? Or pollute it.
Is this the first time God's judgment applied to water? Because obviously during the flood, it wouldn't have.
Yeah, I think so. Well, that's a weird thing I don't know. Don't know. But in these visions, at least.
In its lungs. Fish have lungs.
Yes, they do. They absolutely have lungs.
Their gills.
Right. Yep. Yes. Look, dude. I don't want to get too.
You can move on.
Yeah. But it's a good thing to note. I don't want to get too hung up on trying to make literal things that are poetic, right? So when we talk about everything that has breath praising the Lord, do we say, so that would be dolphins but not sharks or something? Like, no, I don't think that's the right way to look at it, Anyways, so the third angel sounds his trumpet. Oh, we haven't got there yet. Okay, so that's where we are. I would suggest to you that this volcano, meteor, whatever, that's destroying life that we can't do anything about, is, at the very least, just a picture of an unmanageable ecological problem, right? There is a geological and ecological problem that is too big for us to handle. Now, by giving you that interpretation, already, probably, In your mind, you're thinking of ways to interpret or ways that people would interpret that and map it onto our modern day, right? Maybe. But again, remember, we've talked about this in weeks past, that these things, these pictures stand and throughout history there are cyclical applications for them. And maybe you could put a direct application of something in our world right now. Maybe you can. Fine. But it's probably not the once and for all application of it. Let's go on to number 10, or verse 10.
And the blowing of the trumpet, that's in the spiritual realm, right? So the earth wouldn't be aware of the blowing of the trumpet.
Probably, yeah. Probably, yeah. So what we experience is all of the follow-on consequences. But I don't expect that people who are not given John's perspective would be privy to that happening. Verse 10. The third angel sounded his trumpet, and a great star, blazing like a torch, fell from the sky on a third of the rivers and on the springs of water. The name of the star is Wormwood. A third of the waters turned bitter, and many people died from the waters that had become bitter. All right. How does this work? A star falls on a third of the rivers and a third of the springs. Does it fragment into a bunch of pieces? Yeah, maybe. But again, as I've tried to throughout, I want to remind you, try to, as you're taking in the vision, try to let yourself experience it the way you would experience it in a dream, where you just know that that's what happened, even if in your waking life you can't describe it properly. You know, you wake up and you're like, oh yeah, this thing fell, and be like, oh, well, what happened? Did it bounce? Did it split? Did all the waters run together? I don't know. It just, that's what happened. Okay. Specifically in this case, what kind of water is it going to? Fresh water, right? Last time we hit the salt water, which for all its virtues doesn't sustain human life. But now we're hitting the fresh water. And it turns the fresh water bitter, and people drink it anyways. Why would people drink it anyways? They don't have any choice. Yeah, they're desperate. But again, we're still looking at a third. So we get a third of the waters. It doesn't say a third of the people died. It does say many. Probably enough that folks learned, oh, we can't drink this. Wormwood, that seems like a very specific, and maybe it seems like a demonic term for you. If so, it's probably because you read the Screw Tape letters. Yeah. But wormwood was just in the ancient world, it was a bitter, poisonous substance, right? So a third of the waters, but there's still 2/3 of the fresh water out there. Things are getting tight and uncomfortable, but life is going to keep going on. Verse 12.
It's curious that the star has a name,
Mm-hmm.
but we name stars.
Sure we do, yeah. We haven't named any wormwood, have we? That would be a bad move. The fourth angel sounded his trumpet, and a third of the sun was struck, a third of the moon, a third of the stars, and a third of them turned dark. A third of the day was without light, and also a third of the night. How do you strike a third of the sun? I don't know, right? Don't fixate on that kind of thing. Let's take what it means, right? Let's get down to some essentials here real quick. So we had the pleasure of going to the little living town of Bethlehem thing that they do out in, is it Bertram? Burnett? Yeah, Burnett, that's right. We had the joy of going there last week, I guess it was. Wasn't it last week? Yeah. And it opens at night, which is appropriate for a Christmas reenactment. And you get to go in some of the houses. And they're really, I mean, they have candles, they have oil lamp and stuff. It's dark, y'all. It's dark in those houses. In the ancient world, when the sun goes down, guess what? You do too, right? I mean, you can burn the midnight oil, right, for a little while, but it's expensive. And I mean, generally speaking, when you make hay while the sun shines, right? And then when the sun goes down, you're done. And if you're going to do things at night, if you're going to navigate by night, and we're less tuned into this because there's so much light pollution, even out here in our beautiful Liberty Hill. There's enough light pollution that you don't realize how many stars there really are. But on a night with a full moon, you can still see pretty good. Pretty well. Sorry. I'm a public speaker. I should do this. So to have the nighttime sky shortened, let alone the daytime sky, it's really cutting into the safety, security, and productivity of humanity, right? You're just, a third of your time just got swallowed up. You can't do anything. What's more, and I think this is significant. Again, remember, John is getting things delivered to him beyond his ability to reckon them. And I don't think John would have any argumentation about that, right? One of the things that makes planet Earth so miraculous is our relationship with the sun. We are the perfect distance to have water naturally occurring in all 3 states. We have hospitable climates for even cold-blooded creatures, let alone warm-blooded creatures. If we were just a little bit farther or a little bit closer to the sun, toast or ice cubes, right? It wouldn't happen. I don't know if John quite understood, maybe he did, just how delicate and important the relationship is between Earth and the sun in terms of the occurrence and maintenance of life. But man, when I read those words, I feel that.
You know, it strikes me, your idea of the vision, kind of imagine. I can imagine all the people on earth trying to blame somebody for this.
Hmm?
The people who have not accepted Jesus, that don't understand what's happening. They're going to be blaming, factories for pollution. They're going to be blaming their neighbors. Everybody's going to be pointing fingers trying to figure out what's going on.
Yeah. Well, and could a third of the sun being blotted out, a third of the moon and stars being blotted out, be a symbolic representation of pollution so bad that it's filtering out the light? It could be.
Someone's going to try to explain it in worldview terms.
Well, but here's the thing I'm going to say. It could be that. And it would be totally fair for you to identify it as such, as long as what you don't do is say, and that is the only time and the only way that it should be interpreted. That's, I think, the mistake. Because the thing is, all of these things that we're reading, they're not just a factual accounting of things for the sake of accounting facts. All that's in this vision is meant to call us to action. And the action it's calling us to is not necessarily environmental regulations or legislation.
Stop saying.
It's calling us to repentance. It's calling us to evangelism, right? I mean, golly, wouldn't you want everyone you care for to be sealed? Wouldn't you want everyone you care for to be numbered in the 144,000? It's also told to us so that as we see these things and as we start to interpret these things as occurring around us, we don't panic. You don't assume that because these things are happening, things are out of control, or God has lost his patience. We're given this vision so that we know that things are in control and God still loves, cares for, and protects his own, and that they will be victorious with him in the end. That's the point.
It reminds me that the magician's trying to do the things that Moses was doing in Egypt, right? Like turning the water to blood.
Yep.
They're going, we can do that. It's just magic.
Yep.
Until it wasn't.
Until it wasn't. That's right. Yep.
Yeah, all of our computer simulations.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Yeah, that's one of the things that I've wondered about this a little bit. Why did Jesus come 2,000 years ago and not now? Why didn't he choose now? Look, we've got satellites and live video feeds, and like everybody around the world could see these things happening in real time.
Because he knows he wouldn't have made it to 33.
Well, but part of me wonders, well, is it because we are so numb to the miraculous? I mean, I know there's plenty of good-hearted, even Lutheran folk, that if they hear about somebody being miraculously healed, they're a little skeptical because of how many, charlatans have abused people by claiming to do miracles, which is unfortunate because I believe God still does.
Medicine has improved so much too.
Right? Yeah.
Their sight and hearing being restored.
Yeah. Look, it was like 20 years ago when Chris Angel, who's a magician guy, was out walking on water in a pool, and everybody around him was like, wow, amazing, Whereas I'm going, well, oh boy. If you don't want to know how these tricks are done, tune out now. Me, I'm going, yeah, he was probably on a plexiglass plate, and the people around him who look stunned, they all know. They're getting paid. It's TV. Jesus descends from the clouds and it's on TV all over the world. People are going to go, oh yeah, David Copperfield did that one. You know what I mean? Yeah. I just wonder if that's why 2,000 years ago was the right time and place. I don't know. But
the same thing to Moses, though. I mean, they're like, we've seen this done before.
I know. All right. Verse 13. I love this one. This is a great one. You're going to love this one. As I watched, I heard an eagle that was flying in midair call out in a loud voice, "Woe, woe, woe to the inhabitants of the earth, because the trumpet blast's about to be sounded by the other three angels." I'm sorry.
It wasn't bad enough.
I'm sorry. Are you telling me that it's about to get bad? This wasn't the bad part yet? Yeah, actually. We'll save the bad part for after the new year. I'll wrap it up here in a few minutes. I know the kids would probably like a little bit of a run through, and I need to reset things before our children's program. Yeah. But let's just talk about a few of the significant things here. Number one, only a third is struck, which means there's a lot of hope out there in the world for people to escape. And let's be real about this. We talked about the seven seals, and the first seal was human tyranny, and then the second one was warfare, and then the third one was economic disparity leading to famine, right? The way of the world is, it doesn't matter what your economic system is. The way of the world is this: the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. If you look at when bad things happen, natural disasters, disease, you name it, the people who die or suffer the most tend to be at the bottom of the economic scale and the influence. So if you think about a third and a third and a third, the people who are working the world system are probably still skating by okay. And the things they espouse are probably still sounding like good gospel to people who want what they have. You know what I'm saying? There's a bird. There's a bird in flight saying, "Whoa, whoa, whoa." And that's interesting because it could have been an angel. Usually if you think about a divine messenger, it's an angel. They fly, they announce things. But why a bird? Well, I think it might be because this is the voice of creation speaking, not so much the voice of heaven. And he's not wrong. He's not wrong. However, he seems very concerned. But I think the voice of heaven knows that for those with God, it's going to be okay. We're going to get to the importance of that seal in our next class, but we're not going to have class until the new year. Next week, we have our fellowship hour, so make sure you're here for that. So we'll pick it up, chapter 9, in 2 weeks. All right, stick around.
So fast as a day.
Let's verify that.